Welcome to the France Campus Tour 2024. This year, we are visiting multiple business schools across France and finding out the best ones for you. For the ones who don't know, the goal of these videos is to bring to you raw and real information from the ground for you to figure out whether studying at these business schools is worth it or not. So let's get this started. Today, we are at one of the top business schools in France, which is INSEAD, and we are exploring this campus, which I personally think is beautiful, rustic, and is giving me such a positive vibe. Here at the campus, we got a chance to speak with several students about their experiences, and there are so many crazy insights that we would love to share with you. So, we have divided this video into two parts. Part 1 is a detailed interview with an MBA student here, while part 2 is my opinion about INSEAD and whether it is worth it or not. So let's get this started. Hi guys, so today we have Dhananjay with us. He's currently studying at INSEAD in the MBA program, and he's going to share his experiences with us today. So let's get this started. Yeah. All right. So the first question I had for you was, what are the most popular programs here at INSEAD?
So I think the two most popular programs that I see is one is the MIM, which has been recently started, and the second is the MBA. The MBA comes in two different cohorts. We have the D batch, which is what I'm part of, and then we have the J batch, which doesn't have the internship track. Right. So these are the two most important courses, or not most important, but the most popular courses that I do see. And INSEAD, although it isn't a university, it has a lot of executive programs and a lot of executive courses where you meet a lot of people that come in for about 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess everybody knows about the INSEAD MBA. It's super popular. It is one of the best in the world, right? And we just went across the school. The campus is beautiful. And we had like conversations with you and your friends. And it was, I think, a good insight into a lot of things that we actually had not imagined. So yeah, let's move on to the next critical question about the school. So most students come here with a perspective to progress or transition into their careers. So how would you say like the career services are in terms of helping students do so?
Sure. So I think one thing, especially for us as Indian students, that we need to really understand is that the way career services work abroad versus how they work in India is very different. They're very two-pronged. In India, we have a lot of a lot of companies that come onto campus and then that recruit us. Versus here, it's a bit more. You have to put yourself out there, and you kind of have to take the extra initiative and the extra steps to go forward. That being said, at INSEAD, CDC helps us out a lot. We have our own career coach, and we have a lot of resources with Career Globe or other platforms that we can utilize to probably land interview opportunities and apply to different companies. We also do use LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor to kind of apply to different companies and see what clicks for us. The difference, I think, is that the European culture is that you need to rely more on your network, which INSEAD is super strong on, and you need to rely more on personal connections and take the proactive measures to get what you want. It's a bit of an uphill battle, especially in today's climate, where the economy in Europe and the rest of the world is pretty down, except Asia. Asia is doing pretty well. But that being said, you have to take more steps yourself to get what you want, and it's doable. It's just a bit more effort and a bit more slogging that you probably wouldn't have expected if you compare it to, let's say, an Indian MBA, for example.
So what he means to say is that they're going to definitely help you, but not maybe handhold you to get a job. And at the end of the day, you have to do it on your own, right? That's great. So let's move on to the next critical question. What strategies and tips can you share to increase the chances of getting accepted into INSEAD MBA?
So with INSEAD, I think the way I've given advice to a lot of students, prospective students who are planning on applying to INSEAD, was INSEAD looks for 4 things, right? And they're not shy about this. A lot of admissions interviews also explain this. They look for 4 things. One is obviously academic rigor. But when I say academic rigor, they don't exactly look for the best of the best marks. When I graduated from Christ University for my undergrad, I got about 3 out of 4 GPA, which is around 60%, right? So not exactly stellar marks. My GMAT was at 700, but I do recommend people get a GMAT of, let's say, 720 and 730 above. That gives you a bit more of a safe bracket to apply to INSEAD. The second thing that INSEAD looks for is definitely your hobbies, what motivates you outside of work, right? So what's your interests, what drives you as a person? My interests were music and motorcycling. I tour a lot solo. I do a lot in terms of music. I've been a professional musician for quite some time. So these were things that really stood out outside of what I've done in terms of work. The third thing that INSEAD looks for is they look for how you progressed in work, right? So like in terms of the designations you've held, the leadership opportunities, have you taken the initiative to manage a certain project? If you managed a certain project, what were your learnings from it? It need not be glorifying learnings. For example, I've done some projects where I had clients walk away, and these were some of our biggest clients for our company, so it was a big failure on my part, but the learnings I walked away from that was immense, right? So they're not exactly looking for success stories. Even your failure stories are more than welcome, provided you've learned something from it, right? You've worked on it and you've learned how to grow from it. And then the fourth thing that INSEAD looks for is your international exposure. A lot of people get confused in this point because they think that it means you should have moved abroad or you should have worked abroad. That's not necessarily the case, although if you have worked abroad it helps. But what they mean is, can you handle an international setting? INSEAD is very unique in the fact that my classroom had about 40 to 50 different nationalities in a classroom of 90 people. So what that means is, at max, you probably have 2 to 3 different Indians in your class, and then it's just everyone from everywhere, right? So you have Europeans who are naturally a bit more reserved. Americans are very open. You have people from Asia as well, who again have their own kind of thing going on. And what this means is you need to have the aptitude to be able to deal with people from these different nationalities, right? Some of my best friends are French, Moroccan, Algerian. So it depends on how you can tackle these kinds of adverse situations, if you will. Yeah, so these are the four parameters that INSEAD kind of judges you on and looks for.
Got it. And can you comment on the academic rigor and curriculum of the MBA program here?
In terms of academics, they're not too stringent on it. They want to know that you can handle the academic rigor because it is a 10-month program. It gets very intense very quick. The saying that we like to use at INSEAD is it's like drinking water from a fire hydrant. It's just very difficult to swallow, but you will enjoy the time that you have here. Right, you kind of need to juggle a delicate balance between partying, traveling, and studying. Uh, yeah, but NCR also has this policy where we don't disclose our grades to companies or to whoever's concerned. We only have two factors. The first one is whether you're on Dean's list, and if you're not on Dean's list, then that's it, right? So we don't judge in terms of whether you've done a 2.6 in your GPA or gotten like a 2.9. It doesn't matter.
Now, moving on to the next question, what do you do apart from academics? Like, what are the fun things to do at INSEAD post, like, studying and giving your exams and all of that?
Well, that's a loaded question. I think we like to have a lot of partying. There's a lot of parties that happen, be it house parties or be it going to a pub, which is in Fontainebleau, or sometimes going to the forest and having a good time. These sessions have been super invaluable because you get to meet some amazing people outside of the classroom setup, and you really get a deep dive on who they are, what makes them tick, what got them here, what they're looking for out of INSEAD, and their stories about life in general. For me personally, I'm a person that's a bit more reserved. I don't like going to a lot of parties, but I've found myself going to a few more than I would have preferred. But for me, I really like talking to people and having introspective perspectives with them. Right? I think everyone has a very unique story and something that they bring to the table, especially when you're at INSEAD, because there's a reason you managed to get here, and INSEAD is a coveted business school. So everyone's story is very unique. Everyone's drive is very unique, and there's always something you can learn from someone, right? And I think majority of the learning experience, yes, you have professors and you have people who have esteemed backgrounds, qualifications, and whatnot, what have you. But at the same time, your MBA experience really comes from the students that you're with. And the more you talk to them and the more you speak to them, the more you get to understand and change your perspective. My perspective has been significantly shifted by the people I talk to. But that being said, you need to be able to have an open mind and have your thoughts constantly cross-questioned. So one is definitely the parties and the house parties that we come across. The second is the traveling. I think the beauty of having the Schengen visa is we get access to a lot of countries. So a lot of students from my cohort, despite going into debt, they've the trend that we see in our cohort is that everyone at this point, I'm 6 months into my classes, so everyone by this point has visited at least 5 to 6 different countries on the Schengen visa. And when I say 5 to 6 different countries, yes, we've been to the popular cities of each country, but we've interacted with the local folk from each country, right? We've hung out with waiters, we've hung out with the local students, we've hung out with people who are probably 50 or 60 years old, so they've seen life in their region for what it is. and they kind of impart their words of wisdom or their knowledge to us. And when you get to really synthesize these ideas, and when you get to really understand what they say and why they say it and their perspectives on life, it shapes you. And the third one is probably your study group. So at INSEAD, we get allotted a study group in your core periods, your P1 and P2. Your study group essentially becomes your backbone. You do assignments together, and depending on how far you want to take it, you can even do your individual assignments together, or have dinners together, or even travel together. And they become your support system. They're completely diversified. My study group, I was the only Indian, so I had someone who was Pakistani Canadian, had an Austrian, had someone from Portugal, from South Africa, and then one from China. So it was really diverse, and the way we interacted with each other was beautiful. We established common grounds, common boundaries, understood each other's perspectives, the hobbies that kind of get us going and what makes us us. And it was a beautiful feeling. And they learned to understand that I'm a very reserved person, so I don't interact with too many people, or I take my own time. And all these beautiful perspectives that arise out of people is just a wonderful learning experience that you can then take into the professional field for years to come. It's wonderful soft skills that you probably wouldn't be able to develop elsewhere.
I guess Dhananjay has established for us that it's like a super fun community here as well. It's not just like academic or job oriented. And I think that's what an MBA is for. It's like for the entire experience of it, right? Like you said, meeting different people, doing projects together, traveling as well, and things like that. And that's what like INSEAD stands out. It's really about where it's located, the visa, and all of that, right? So it's super interesting. And I think we already know it's super fun. But what about what happens next? Like, what is the reputation of INSEAD outside of France and let's say Middle East, where it's like super popular? What is like the reputation of INSEAD in India, let's say?
So I think the reputation of INSEAD in India hasn't been too strong, right? To be frank about it, I think INSEAD in India doesn't have that strong of a brand value as of right now. We have a strong alumni network and a strong community. But if you were to take it into, let's say, a tier two or a tier three company, or even a startup company for that matter, not many people would be too aware. But if you were looking at, let's say, consultancy or any other tier one, like the big fours, uh, upper management would definitely know what INSEAD is and what they stand for and what it's about. Me personally, because I'm looking at startups, I am well aware that startups in India may not have the full picture of what INSEAD stands for and how strong it is. That being said, INSEAD truly is the business school for the world, which is, I think, that was written here. And we have alumni pretty much everywhere across the globe. So, if you were targeting, let's say, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Europe, the Middle East, US, and Canada to a certain extent, obviously they have their own business schools, which may take priority. But when you look at it on a truly global perspective, we have alumni all across the world, and when you shoot them a message, they're more than happy to help you out. We have this big pay it forward culture, where they always have your back no matter what. I found myself in certain situations when I was in Madrid or even Portugal, when my motorcycle had a bit of issues. I could just ping someone who's from the INSEAD alumni community, and they would help out. So I never felt truly alone in that perspective. Although I like to do solo trips and I like to be alone, I knew that if I had a difficult spot or a challenge, the INSEAD alumni community always has my back, right? And even my own cohort, for that matter, has my back. Um, yeah, so for Indian students, if you're thinking of coming to INSEAD for an MBA and then pivoting back to India, just from an ROI perspective, that may not be the best decision unless you're really clear that you can make up the investment that it is to come to INSEAD. But yeah, for that matter, I think you would have a better opportunity globally as opposed to returning back to India. But it also depends on how you play it out and the connections you have and the network you have. Right. So that being said, I wouldn't recommend coming to INSEAD to just go back to India unless you have something stable. Um, but INSEAD can definitely unlock a lot of doors globally.
Got it. And it was also very clearly visible while roaming around the campus with you that the community here is like super tight. And I guess it's going to continue in the future as well once you guys graduate. So I have this one last question for you, which is what would you say are the drawbacks of studying here at INSEAD?
Okay, so when it comes to drawbacks, I think here it's a bit more subjective on exactly what you're looking for. In today's market, the way the situation is, it's very difficult for Indian students to probably get an internship or a full time job in Europe, just given the market slowdown, especially if you're not looking at consulting. I'm one of the few who's not looking at consultancy, despite INSEAD being basically primarily a consultancy oriented school. I'm looking more into tech and product management. Right now, tech is facing a massive slowdown. There's a lot of layoffs, so getting an internship in tech is a bit difficult. That being said, I think coming to INSEAD's it's a decision that pays off in the long run because it's one of the most prestigious institutes in the world that has a really strong alumni network. So even the alumni that interviewed me said that you'll only recognize the ROI of INSEAD about 4 or 5 years down the line. So that puts me in a unique position where I'm young enough to be able to afford INSEAD for how expensive it is, and then I can see that 4 or 5 years down the line, I still wouldn't be, you know, too old to not recognize its value. So for me, in that regard, the drawback is that if you're probably on the older side, an MBA in this kind of climate might be a lot more difficult. The second thing is the language barrier is definitely a thing because in France, yes, French takes a lot of priority, and there's a lot of pride with the French people when it comes to speaking French. Luckily, I know French, so for me, it's a bit more easier to assimilate into the French community and talk to either French expats or the locals in France. But I know for a fact that some of my Indian friends who don't know French, they face a lot of the cold shoulder because they can't speak the language that well. And French people tend to be a lot more reserved to people who don't try or to people who don't know the language too well. And that doesn't really come from a xenophobic perspective or from any other perspective, but it's just that it makes it a lot more difficult because they don't know English and we don't know French. So trying to bridge that gap is a bigger challenge. Other than that, I mean, the only drawbacks I see is that INSEAD can be a lot expensive, right? That's probably the only drawback I can see. Yeah, and then but I would say it's mitigated by the fact that your classroom is so diversified and people have such beautiful perspectives on life that you probably wouldn't be able to find elsewhere. And you realize at the end of the day, money doesn't become the primary obstacle, right? And it's just these soft skills and what makes you you that can help you differentiate yourself down the line uh, when you go into corporate or anything else for that matter. So yeah, I don't see too many drawbacks at INSEAD. Maybe the only other personal gripe I can see is that in Fontainebleau, which is where we are right now, is that it's very bubble centric. It's its own kind of small bubble outside of the rest of the world. Fontainebleau is about an hour and a half away from Paris, so you don't exactly have the big, urban cosmopolitan kind of feel here. It's very rural, very rustic, very old school. For me, I personally love that kind of vibe, but I know a lot of my cohort that doesn't like it too much, where they feel like things get very old very quick and they feel very bored, which is probably why we travel every weekend. But you know I can see why that can be a point of struggle, or that can be an issue to a lot of people. So it really is subjective depending on what you look for. INSEAD Singapore is the exact opposite of what INSEAD Fontainebleau is, because it's in Singapore, which is the main finance hub of the world. You have so many professionals that you can meet. You have so many people that you can meet. It's truly a cosmopolitan city. Versus here, it's very rural, very old school. So it depends on what you're looking for. So personally, I can't think of a lot of cons, or I can't think of a lot of issues, but I can definitely see a lot of Indians that might not really enjoy this vibe that I do enjoy. So
So of course there are drawbacks to anything in life, right? There are so many pros and there are a few cons. But if you prepare for the language, let's say if you know like at least A2 level of French, you can make your way through it, because overall I think everybody does speak in English here, at least on the campus. And about like other things that you mentioned, like the rustic vibe, I think I love it. Like it's lovely. It's a little away from Paris, but it's not like really far that you cannot go. You can always be in Paris over the weekends and do. All right, so that's all the questions I had for you today. Thank you so much for being so honest and kind, and most importantly, to make us meet your friends and colleagues. We loved hanging out at your campus today and speaking with your friends. The kind of inputs they've given me are incredible. They're going to help me guide my students not just get an admit at INSEAD, but also to ensure that they build a successful career here. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best in your journey. So that's all for today, guys. Like mentioned before, part 2 is all about my opinion of INSEAD and whether pursuing an MIM or MBA degree is worth it or not. Also, in case any of you is looking for help with, getting an admit at any of the top B schools in Europe or anywhere in the world, feel free to reach out to us on our website here. You can get a free profile evaluation or get on a call with me. So all the best, and I hope this video helped you.